guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to the second part of this crochet backpack tutorial. If you're watching this video, then I assume that you just finished watching part 1 and you should have a matching stack of granny squares just like I have. And I know you're ready to move on to the next part, but before we do, I just want you to give yourself a pat on the back or a round of applause for doing all of this work, because I know it wasn't easy, but I'm so proud of you for locking in, sticking with it, putting in the time to get all of these granny squares done. And now we get to move on to the fun part, actually connecting and putting the granny squares together. It's actually pretty simple. It just takes some time to do, just like how it took some time to make all these granny squares. It's just something that you have to lock in and do. So in this second part of the tutorial, we are going to be focusing on assembling the body of the bag. So you are going to need all of your granny squares. You're going to need your accent color, and we are going to primarily be using the larger hook, so either the 5mm or 5.5mm hook. And I think using some stitch markers will also come in handy for this part of the tutorial. So get your supplies and let's get to it. In the Yarnspirations pattern that we're using, they refer to the granny squares as motifs, but just for the sake of clarity and for this tutorial, I'm just going to call them granny squares. Okay guys, before we start joining our granny squares together, this is the exact layout that you want to put your granny squares in. So it should be 12 granny squares across and 2 at the bottom, making 14 granny squares in total. The granny squares that you see in the middle will be the front of the bag. These 2 at the bottom will be the bottom of the bag, and the 4 granny squares on each side will be the sides and the back of the bag. So no granny square is perfect, even though they look similar, so I suggest that in the first 8 granny squares across that you put the best of your granny squares on display, and on the ones that don't look the best, maybe look a little funky, I would suggest putting those at the bottom, or the ones that are going to be at the back of the bag. So to join the 2 granny squares together, we are only going to be working in the back loops. So as you look on your square head on, you want to look at the side of the granny square that you want to connect to the other one. So when you turn the granny square this way, you should be able to see all of these V's from the stitches that we've made. The front loops are on the left side. They are towards the front of the granny square as we were crocheting and working towards the end. And the loops that we're going to work out of to join the granny squares together are the back loops, which would be on the right side. So all of these loops on this side are what we're going to be working out of. To make sure everything stays even and lined up, I like to use a stitch marker to kind of clip the 2 corners together. And it makes it easy to work with and make sure all of the V's on each side are lined up. So to begin, place 2 granny squares beside each other, right side up. Using larger hook, join B, which is your accent color, with a slip stitch to granny square on left, in corner, chain 1 space. Insert hook from front to back into back loop of corner chain 1 on the same left granny square. Insert hook from front to back into back loop of corner chain 1 space of right granny square. There should be 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and draw through all 3 loops on your hook. And this is what it should look like when you finish joining the granny squares together. You should have this nice braided looking pattern that goes along the length of the squares. And now you're ready to add in some more granny squares. And it's very easy to keep adding on more squares. To do so, you just want to line up the next squares that you want to add in and repeat the same sequence we just did for the first set of squares. Continuing on from the first set, you want to insert your hook through a corner back loop on the left square and then do the same thing on the right square. You should have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops. And repeat this sequence until you reach the top of this set of granny squares. Hey guys, just checking in. How are you coming along with joining your granny squares? This is the progress that I've made so far. The easiest way that I can suggest to join all of your squares together is to start with the set of 2 squares we made at the beginning and then work down the line horizontally until you reach the end. And once you get to the end, you will fasten off and leave a tail long enough for you to sew in later. And then you want to connect the last 2 squares along the bottom in a horizontal line. Once your horizontal lines are finished, then you can start to join the rest of the squares vertically until you reach the end. We will continue using the same method of joining the granny squares by starting off with a slip stitch and working along the squares in the back loops only. So I'll meet you back here once I've joined all my squares into one big piece. Now that we've finished connecting all of the squares into one big piece, we are going to work on connecting and shaping the bottom of the bag. So let's start shaping the bottom of the bag one side at a time. Before we begin connecting the squares, I recommend tying any loose tails together. It will help to tighten up the corners of the bag and keep the tails together and out of the way for the next step. To begin, we will connect this bottom square to the square right next to it. To make things easier, I'm going to use a stitch marker to clip both squares together. We are going to repeat the same sequence of joining the squares by starting with a slip stitch on a corner back loop of the left square. Proceed to join the two squares until you reach the top of the set. Once you finish joining those two squares, you should then connect the square you are currently on to the last adjacent square and then fasten off. And so far, your bag should be looking something like this. Now repeat the same steps for the other side to complete the bottom of the bag. And now that we've finished that, the final step for the body of the bag is to join the two sides at the back. For this step, turn the bag inside out and align the two sides together. Then start with the slip stitch on any loop near the bottom of the bag. Chain 1, and then work 1 single crochet through each stitch through both sides of the bag until you reach the top. and then fasten off. Congratulations, guys! You have just finished making the body of your backpack. I know this part of the tutorial was a lot of hard work, but you did it. In the next part of this tutorial, we will start with creating the straps for the backpack. Before we begin that part, now would be a good time to tuck in all of the tails you have so far. Or not, it's up to you if you want to do it later. But I know, having to tuck in the tails suck. It is my least favorite thing about crocheting as well. But you gotta do it sometime. But I digress. Before this video ends, I just want to thank you all for watching this video series and doing this project with me. I appreciate every one of you who subscribes to my channel and shows my videos some love with likes and comments. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and keep being creative. Bye!